I'd like to welcome to the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast, Adam Nash. Adam is the co-founder and CEO of Daffy.org, a not-for-profit community built around a new modern platform for giving. Adam is a seasoned executive, investor, and advisor. He also teaches the Personal Finance for Engineers course at Stanford, and was previously the president and CEO of Wealthfront. He has been employed by some of the most famous companies in the world, including LinkedIn and others. And he's had a really diverse and fascinating career in the world of technology. And I'm excited to have this, what I know is going to be a riveting conversation, to talk about the nexus of all that he's done in the for-profit space and now what he's bringing to the not-for-profit space. Adam, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Pleasure. First of all, have you ever been interviewed by a rabbi before? That's a good question.
It is my first podcast with a rabbi, although not the first time I've been interviewed by a rabbi, but
I'm sure
not live in front of others.
I hear you. Okay, cool. So I always ask my guests, just as an opener, to share with our audience who you are in your own words.
I thought you did a very nice job and flattering. In some ways, my background feels very, very normal. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My parents are both doctors. Oldest of 4 children, and very fortunate, this time and place for technology and innovation. But I was raised in a good family. My parents did a good job of providing us with a great education and instilling Jewish values in us. Went to a Hebrew day school when I was younger, I think through 6th grade in Sunnyvale. What I've made my career around is around this intersection of technology and design, around not just what technology can do for people, but also how people use technology, how they feel about technology. And it's been a wonderful time to build that career. This has been the last 30 years have been an amazing time to build new products and services, to build new companies, to actually touch millions, in some cases billions of people with your work. And so I feel very fortunate about that. But yeah, in some ways, depending on who you ask, I always joke about, I used to joke at LinkedIn, right? Your professional reputation is so important. But for many in the community, I'm a father of 4 and, try to be active and helpful with the different groups that I support. And so, there's all different slices to our life.
No, I hear that 100%. I'm actually, as I'm hearing you talk, it's just like percolating in my head. It's like fascinating to me. Growing up in the area you did and in the space that you're in, like, I'm sure you've crossed paths with or interacted with some very, very famous people kind of in the space. I'm just thinking the name Steve Jobs is popping into my head. Like, just out of curiosity, did you ever have any intersection with him, any personal interaction with him? Obviously, he hasn't been here for a while now, but
Yeah, I did. And when Steve passed away, I did write a note about it, some of my memories, etc. It's actually up on my blog. I'm happy to share the link with you and the audience and that sort of thing. And tell that story. But no, I mean, you have to remember, I went to Apple. Actually, I thought I was joining Next. I actually interviewed with Next. The hiring manager was a man named Craig Federighi, who actually runs all of software right now at Apple. He's up on every WWDC. And he took a chance on a 22-year-old engineer coming out of school. But then it turned out Next was acquired by Apple.
right.
Or maybe Next acquired Apple. I'm still not sure exactly what happened. But, so I did, as a young engineer, get to see Steve, but we weren't close. We weren't peers. Steve was Steve Jobs, and I'm a small engineer. But I have a few conversations with him. I actually met my wife at Apple,
Oh, wow.
as it turns out, and she had some intersections, etc. But, the inspiration for me with Steve was very much just seeing how he led that turnaround, when he came back. When I joined the company, Gil Amelio was still CEO. I got to see that in operation, but there are a lot of leadership lessons. I think Steve gets a lot of credit for being a technologist, gets a lot of credit for being an innovator. But I think that sometimes people don't give him enough credit for kind of how he managed that turnaround, how he led people through that turnaround in the late 90s. I mean, when I went to Apple, everyone assumed the company would be bankrupt soon. I had a good friend that actually bet me that within 5 years, Apple would be bankrupt.
Really?
Yeah, it turned out that he did not win that bet. Apple's not the most valuable company in the world, but I was just very inspired by what I learned from him and just watching him work with people. Steve was not perfect. He definitely had some attributes, and he had a mixed childhood and upbringing, a lot of pain in his life in different ways. But I was very impressed. And I have to say that I feel very fortunate to have been there at the time. And in later companies, when I was at eBay, LinkedIn, Dropbox, Wealthfront, et cetera, I reflect often about some of the lessons I learned about that time and that team, not just Steve, but all the great people who were involved at that time.
Interesting. I mean, I'm going completely like out of order here, but but I'm curious, as an angel investor who's invested in a lot of these types of companies, like, we're talking about Apple, like when it was nothing and what it is today. Like, obviously, to be a successful investor, you have to kind of be a real visionary to be able to kind of see at the very early stages. And obviously, a lot of these things don't succeed. I think the odds are just, certainly stacked against. But what is it? What is it for you to really identify, when you look through your track record and you see kind of, so you've made a ton of these types of investments, when you've seen success, what is the pattern that kind of has gone through the different success stories in terms of like from the beginning till the end? Like, what was it that you saw at the beginning that really kind of like, that gave you some sense? You can never know for sure, but some sense that this has legs. This might be something that's going to be something.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of paradoxes and contradictions inherent in building new companies and new technologies. Actually, I think we overstate the case for people being visionaries and seeing the future. A lot of people are visionary and see the future. It just turns out that they're mostly wrong, and we only know it with hindsight. And we have this amazing survivorship bias. We only remember the ones who were right. We don't remember all the other people who went the wrong way. But my experience as an investor and as an entrepreneur has been that actually it takes a very bizarre mix of both humility and hubris to build new companies and products, right? The hubris comes in that belief that you see something that maybe everyone does not, that you can see the future. I actually think in technology we cheat, because there are some questions in technology that are very hard to answer what the future will hold. And yet some are very easy. I mean, Moore's law made it very obvious. Computational power is going to go up relentlessly every year, every decade, to the point where 10 years from now, things will be so much cheaper, so much less expensive, so much easier. A smart person could look at the exact same problem and solve it a different way. And so you have to have some hubris to believe that you can take those facts and say, no, when computation is cheaper, when networking is cheaper, when we're more connected, when devices move forward, there will be new solutions to problems that are even better than the ones today. But I'm going to start building it now. I'm not going to wait 10 years. I'm going to build it now. But it also takes humility. The best investors I know are very specific about the areas they think that they're great at, and actually very hands-off on businesses and products and technologies that they're not experts in, right? I say this all the time as an angel investor. To this day, a lot of founders pick me and they'll pitch their business to me, and I'll say that makes a lot of sense. I don't have expertise in that area. I don't know how to build that type of business. I don't know if I could be that helpful to you. And I don't even know if I could evaluate whether that's a great business or not. I built my career in areas, not just software, but very focused on how to build software for consumers, how to build marketplaces, how to build, fintech, these different areas. And I do poke in, like a lot of folks, into other areas I want to learn more about and that I'm excited to support. I mean, you don't want to come to me to build the next supersonic jet, but I'm very excited to be an investor in a company like Boom Arrow or space exploration. There's a number of great companies there.
Have you ever crossed paths with Elon Musk?
I do have an Elon story. I'm not close to Elon. So like a lot of things in Silicon Valley, it's a lot of, I mean, I think this is why we all got into social networking back in the day. It's a lot of second degree connections, friends of friends. And so, excuse me for a second. But no, Elon, of course, was at PayPal in early days. Reid Hoffman, who I worked with close there. So there's a lot of friends in common, but I don't know Elon directly. I do have the fun story I can tell is that, when I was still at Stanford, Elon actually did try to recruit me for one of his first companies, the company that became Zip2, which is a mapping company. I met him at the Peninsula Creamery in the late 90s in Palo Alto. It's a little diner, that sort of thing. And we talked about mapping, and actually, it's very funny. We talked about natural language and the progress computers were making understanding natural human speech and how that was going to change everything. And
interesting.
It was fun, but yeah, little anecdotes like that. Nothing major.
Is this AI boom? Does it have legs? Is this like overhyped? Is it underhyped? What do you think about that?
I'm gonna check all of the above. There are definitely some people who are overhyping it. And there are people who are underhyping it, but I will say that you'd be making a big mistake to not see this as one of the most significant technology and platform advancements in a long time, at least in the software world, right? Like what you look for in platform improvements is you look for technologies that take something that was you have to look at important problems, but something that was very expensive to do, that all of a sudden becomes very inexpensive to do. Something that you could only do a few times, but now you can do in an almost unlimited fashion. And we've seen these technologies over time. And AI is, I mean, if you've played with it, it's amazing. It's amazing what it can do. It's amazing what a prompt can do from a design standpoint, writing, English. It really does think that we've unlocked a new set of capabilities at a scale that just is unheard of. I mean, just look, I mean, we're just glossing over basic things like translating between different languages is all of a sudden has gone from one of the hardest problems out there, decades of people trying to come up with better ways to help people translate from one language to another. And now it can almost be done in real time. Speaking. The applicant device, I mean, languages, writing, design, like I said, I think it's going to be phenomenal. I think it's going to be a phenomenal productivity boost for people who learn how to use this. And a number of my portfolio companies are invested in this, and they focus on different markets. But yeah, I think we're just starting to see, how these technologies work. The hype starts in the beginning, but everyone's impatient. We all want it tomorrow. And it turns out you can't just build great things tomorrow. It takes some time. And so I think that we can look forward to a whole decade of phenomenal improvements in almost every aspect of software as more and more engineers and talented designers figure out how to leverage this technology to do things and help people do their jobs better and more quickly and with higher quality than they could before.
Interesting. Really interesting stuff. So let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to your childhood. So growing up, what did you think you were going to be? Kind of like where you are, was that something that 30 years ago you would have envisioned, or you thought maybe something completely different?
Well, I think, everyone has their own journey. I didn't think I was going to be an engineer. I didn't think I was going to build companies or technology. That came later. I actually don't have to guess at this. It turns out I still have that original copy of that Dr. Seuss book, that book All About Me. Spent a lot of time when I was like 5 years old filling it out. It has a line, "When I grow up, I will be," and I believe that line actually says a doctor and an artist.
Fascinating.
And I'm not sure I've really checked the box on either of those.
Yeah, I was going to say you kind of are both, just in maybe a little more creative ways.
Well, I think that for me, as I was going through my education career, I mean, it turns out I'm interested in a lot of different things. I always have been. I mean, I know some people just focus on one area, but I went to college thinking I was going to major in molecular biology. I didn't move to computer science until my sophomore year. I actually discovered all of engineering at college. I had no visibility on that, in growing up. But I was fortunate. My parents did, emphasize that, a little bit of the journey, a little bit of discovery, figuring out what you love, encouraging me to dive deep into the things that I love. And so if I connect the dots, you asked about Steve Jobs earlier, but if his famous speech at Stanford graduation, and you connecting the dots of your life, when you look backwards, you say, oh, well, I actually always was interested in computers, and I actually always liked mathematics and computation. And I always loved building things, even the design aspect, the art, I mean, heavily plays into things. But no, I think these come together. And like I said, it's a particular time and place. I think someone like me with my skills and background could have ended up in a number of different careers. I mean, my specialty in high school, I did speech and debate for 4 years. I competed on a state level, national level, in different events. I could have been a lawyer. I could have been a doctor. I could have been a number of things. But I went to college in the early 90s. I went to a university like Stanford University where engineering was encouraged. And there was a lot of integration with industry, a lot of positive support for not just going out into the world and getting a job, but actually thinking of new things and building new companies. And so, we're all a little bit a product of our bringing in an environment. But I feel very fortunate, like I said earlier, to end up here. But I can't pretend I saw it coming. And actually, by the way, the career advice I give to people these days is to not try to do that. I think that that's very, very hard. I think it's just as hard when you're building companies. It's also very hard in your individual life, right? We can't see the future. And that doesn't mean you have to be trapped in the day-to-day. You can think a little bit out, but sometimes it's better to think about where you want to be in a couple years. What's something you want to do that you can't do today? What's a job that you want that you're not qualified to get today?
Mhm.
And maybe you're not qualified today, but in 5 years you could be. What are one or two jobs you could do, a couple years each, that would actually make you qualified to do that job? What are one or two things that you could do to gain the knowledge, gain the experience to do something that you want to do? I think when you look at it that way, then you can navigate the uncertainty of life because you have the flexibility every couple of years to revisit what you're doing and think, do I want to take a different path? Have I learned something new? But also you can have some real time to invest, right? There are very few things of value that you can do quickly. And so it turns out I spent a lot of time at LinkedIn, looking at data on people's careers and thinking about it. Very few people have it all planned out, especially people who are very successful. But what they all have in common is that they looked in a direction that they thought was interesting. There were markets and a version of the world that they believed in. And then they hop from one thing to another, not hopping companies necessarily, but they hop from one thing to another, always learning, always growing, always revising, and thinking about what they could be.
It's what you're saying is fascinating, and I'm a pretty avid LinkedIn user. I'd say I'd spend a decent amount of time there on a daily basis trying to post content and gleaning, people that are in my feeds. And it seems to me people are perpetually changing jobs. I mean, it could be it's biased because it's a platform where people are talking about a career move, but it seems to me that people are not staying in jobs for very long today.
No, and there's very good reasons why they're not, right? So, I mean, this is one of the reasons I joined LinkedIn in the first place. My very first conversation with Reid Hoffman, we talked about a wide range of topics, but we talked about this as well. Increasingly in the modern world, companies are not stable. I mean, I know this from finance. 87% or so of the S&P 500 turns over in a 30-year period, right? The biggest companies in the world are not consistent over a lifetime. And by the way, the economics, the data clearly shows that actually your employers don't reward you as much as the new employers do. People who switch jobs do make more money, right, when they switch jobs across. And so I think at a lot of different levels, the stability, et cetera, in the modern economy, more and more people, the idea of being at one company in one job or even one industry for a lifetime, it's not realistic. I mean, in the technology industry, the average job is 2 to 3 years at most.
Really fascinating.
And so that doesn't mean that I have great friends who have been at great companies for decades.
Right.
But one thing they have in common is every year or two, they take on a new job and a new challenge. And so that, what you see is this pattern, I think, in successful people where you lean into what you're doing, you learn it, you become great at it. But most smart, ambitious people, after a couple of years, they want to go on to the next challenge, do another thing, learn something new, do something new. There's always more. And they ask that question, can I do that better at this company, or is there another company that I should do it at? And I think that the best companies are very good at finding new opportunities for their best talent. And I think that the best individuals are very good about being honest about that decision. But I'm not surprised that people hop around. Like I said, that original conversation with Reid, part of the reason LinkedIn exists is this belief that in the modern world, the two most important things that you have are similar to what it's always been. It's what you know and who you know.
Right.
And that most people were put into a marketplace where they had to own their professional reputation. They had to own their professional relationships. But where was the tool and platform to do it? I mean, the companies have all these tools to manage their employees, to manage hiring, et cetera. Where was the platform for individuals to manage their professional lives? And that was really the inspiration for what LinkedIn became and where it started.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal platform. I mean, it really adds a tremendous amount. I'd love to hear a little bit about inspiration. I'd love to hear maybe about one or two people, either currently in your life, previously in your life, who really motivate you day to day. It could be someone you have a personal connection with. It could be somebody you've never met, but just admire or inspires. You wouldn't mind sharing one or two people or concepts that inspire you.
I've actually, this is another area where I feel so fortunate. I've had the chance to work with, learn from, read about so many incredible people in different areas and walks of life. It's hard to compare them or talent, but a couple come to mind. You asked earlier about family. I mean, it turns out that my grandfather was really the first in my family to really have a successful business. He started, actually, he's still in Wikipedia. He holds the patent, or at least he came up with a patent that jelly that keeps gefilte fish, makes it something you can transport in jars and that sort of thing, and keep it
Really?
fresh. That was his patent.
Interesting.
Yeah, Monroe Nash, years ago. But he went from driving, getting fish up in the Great Lakes, bringing it down to the New York area, all the way to building a business, ended up president of multiple companies. Phenomenal. And I think back, I mean, he passed away in the 90s, but I think back to those early lessons, watching him. It's hard not to be inspired by that. I mean, impacted our family for generations. But at the same time, I think of teachers I've had, at business school, for example. I went to one of the best business schools in the world. But I had the chance to learn from someone like Clay
Oh, it was
Christensen.
a small school in Boston, right? That's a joke.
It's not that small. It's not that
No,
small.
that's why
The
I have a lot of
landownings are
friends who
not
went to
small.
Harvard and like asked them, where'd you go to school? Oh, small school in Boston. They want to say,
Yeah, no. But I mean, and there's so many great professors there. But I mean, I'll tell you, the fact that I got to learn about disruption, not from reading a book by Clay Christensen, but I actually could learn from him, do projects with him. He was a wonderful person and thought leader, and invested a lot in not just his professional life, but also his personal life, etc. So I feel lucky, so I reflect on these, but I mean, also just to add to that list, I mean, I mentioned it before, Reid Hoffman. I don't think that I've ever had a better teacher in terms of the strategic thinking, at a level not just about business, not just about philosophy, but about the people coming together and how companies get built and how you build platforms like that. And so I was fortunate that Reid took a risk on me coming in to run Core Product back in the day. And to this day, we're friends and supporters, but I also count him as a mentor in terms of how I think about problems. I very often at Daffy talk about, things, specific parallels, things I learned from people like Reid in terms of how to approach different problems, not the answers, not the solutions, but how you think about solving those problems.
very interesting. I'm going to fast forward a little bit and then we'll come
Sure.
back to some more of the personal questions, but I want to give you the platform to talk about your platform, because I think,
Sure.
we're a philanthropy podcast and I want to make sure we give it its due, because I think it's incredibly important. So maybe just, catch up our listeners a little bit, kind of what you were doing right before Daffy, kind of what was the thinking of doing this new platform or this new idea, and tell us a little bit about kind of where it is and where it's gone and where it's going.
Well, like a lot of things in life, founding stories of companies always come from multiple places. So it's always interesting to tell different sides of the story, right? There's a people side, there's a strategy side, there's where you're in life. But, to your question, the year was 2020. I had actually left Dropbox with the intent of starting a new company. I was very excited about doing that. But I had a set of ideas. And what became Daffy was one of those ideas. I think I had a Google Doc, like most founders, that had different ideas of companies. I think my doc had 82 ideas on it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, they were not all good, as it turns out. But this idea really spoke to me. And maybe it was because then the pandemic happened. I mean, Daffy was founded during the pandemic, and a lot more people were talking about supporting their community, people in need. It affected different people differently and impacted them. And so maybe it's just because I've been in fintech for more than a decade. And I saw all this amazing technology, all these amazing products. I was on the board of Acorns for 6 years. That's an amazing product that helps people. Millions of Americans now save an extra few $100s a month because Acorns exists, right? I saw a product like Wealthfront. I was CEO for 4 years, help a huge number of people invest and hit their financial goals for themselves and their families. All this great technology to help people save, to help them invest, of course, to help them spend. It's America, of course. But where was the technology to help people give, right? And I think, my 4 children went to a Jewish school, wonderful tradition, Tzedaka. Every Friday, they would bring in spare change in their class, put it in the Tzedaka box, and then every quarter they would vote about which organization to give it to, which local organization. What a wonderful way to teach values of giving, charity, justice, etc. And I just thought, wow, we teach our kids to do this, but how many of us as adults put money aside every week to give to charity, to give to those less fortunate than ourselves? And being the technologist, I said, we can help. we could do something. If we can build apps to help people save, to spend, to invest, we can build apps to help people give. And that's really where Daffy came from. And my co-founder, one of my favorite engineers, one of the best engineers at LinkedIn in the day, also had a history of focusing on this problem of giving. And he decided to jump in with me, and we started the company. It was really just an idea. Fortunately, wonderful firm, Ribbit Capital, led our seed round in 2020. And we were off. And a year later, we had gotten all the regulatory approvals and we launched this app. I mean, Daffy stands for the Donor Advised Fund for You.
Right.
But what Daffy really is just a very simple system of asking a very simple question, which is, how much do you want to give to charity? It's different for everyone. Very personal question. It gets to values, etc. And then, you know, like Apple Health, hitting your goal on steps or exercise or fitness and weight, we try to help people hit their goal on giving, help them put aside a little bit of money every week, every month. And of course, we support very fancy features. We have all the new technology, but the core of the product is just to help people be more generous more often.
Interesting. And how do you go about marketing your product, for example? How do people learn about it, know about it? I'm looking to open a donor advised fund. How would I even, you know, how would I know about it?
Well, we benefited from a lot of positive press coverage, et cetera, because of my reputation, the company, et cetera. When we launched, we probably got more attention than most companies in terms of being a new app. Also, it's not the typical story, right? This isn't another social media app. This isn't another way to trade crypto. This isn't a new AI platform.
Right.
And so I think there was some interest in it, but I think the time of space, I think the 2020s are different. I think people are asking questions about how can we use technology to make ourselves better, to make our society better? How can we really improve things with technology, which I love, as I've dedicated my career to. And so I think Daffy has fit into that. So the most common way that people have heard about Daffy these days, though, is they've heard about it from someone else who uses Daffy, right? We're celebrating our second birthday in just a couple of weeks on September 30th. But fundamentally, Daffy seems to be a product that people don't just use, that they really love. Giving is very personal. It means something to people. And when people find something, I think, that touch those human emotions, they usually want to share it. So
Like you should look at credit card companies who should give like referral points or bonuses for
well, no, we have a bunch of things. Referrals are a big deal. It's been, yeah, obviously I helped, the viral system at LinkedIn was quite good, and we spread across the world. I think LinkedIn almost has 1 billion members at this point, is getting close. So I definitely, I mean, all the standard blocking and tackling we do, right? Like we have wonderful content we put out, which of course gets indexed in search engines, et cetera. We have social media. We don't do a lot of advertising, but we do spend a lot of time kind of trying to invest in thought leadership and getting the word out there that giving can be different. But in the end, I always think that especially for new starters, for new products, you don't start with 1 billion customers. You don't start with a strategy to reach everyone. I mean, the US alone has 60 million households who give to charity every year. Wow. That's a big enough market. At Daffy, for the most part, we try to reach people who give and already believe that giving is something important.
Right.
And just tell them that, hey, there's a much better platform to do that on. And by the way, there's a community of people like you that you can be a part of.
Interesting. What surprised you most so far in this work? What has really like grabbed your attention as well? I never realized that.
Well, actually, it goes back to the original product, right? You have to have some humility when you design software products, right? You always have good ideas, a lot of smart people, a lot of ideas. But then you talk to other people and realize that you don't know as much as you think. And so I'm a big believer, this is a design principle. You always do user research. Salespeople know they do customer development. So the first thing I did with Daffy, of course, with the idea, was I went and talked to dozens of people from around the country about how they think about giving. And boy, there was some humility up front, because what I was hoping for was that there was some common theme, right? Like, so the first question I asked is, how much do you think people should give to charity every year? My interview. I was hoping for a few answers. We could pick one to build around, build a great product. Boy, you ask 20 Americans about how much people should give to charity every year. You're lucky if you only get 20 answers.
Really?
And so no one agrees. Some people talk about the amount of money. They talk about percentages. Some people talk about, well, is it a good year, a bad year? If you're wealthy, you should do it. Everyone has a different idea about how this works. Mm. The good news, though, came a little bit later. I asked the question, well, how much do you think you should give to charity every year.
Mm.
That was the first piece of good news, was that whatever theory people had, they believed in it for themselves. They were not hypocritical, right? They weren't thinking that this is what other people should give, but there's different rules for myself. And actually that was a relief, because that can be very hard to deal with, that inconsistency. And then I asked them it turned out to be a very important question. I didn't think it was at the time, but I asked them, how much did they actually give to charity last year? Not the theory, but in practice, dollars and cents.
Right.
And there was almost invariably, universally, a very ugly pause at that point when people realized, I mean, this is like it's like the high holy days, right? Like you have this reflection.
I was just
you have this reflection. What did I actually do?
Exactly that.
Not what I thought I was, who I was, what I say I do, but what did I actually do? And almost to a T, no one met their own goal. And that put us on the hunt. Actually, it turns out there's academic research that actually confirms this. If you set a goal for your giving, people who do this give 32% more. But most of us don't do it. Most of us don't automate. Most of us, I mean, how much would you save for retirement if it didn't come out of your paycheck every time and automate it?
Right.
These things don't happen by accident. You have to intentionally make it something for you. And giving is important for people. So I was very excited because that told me two things. One is that giving is very important to people. They care. Everyone has a rabbi, a teacher, a priest, a relative, someone who instilled in them this value that said, hey, life is not meant to be purely selfish. There are people less fortunate than yourself. Some of it is not for you, right? You give it away. Most people I talk to believe this, and it was something deep-seated, but they weren't hitting their own goal. And so, wow, I said, if we could build a product that just helped people be as generous as they want to be, it would be amazing. And in fact, the numbers confirm this. If you look at US numbers, individuals give over $300 billion to charity every year. If they gave 32% more, that would be an extra $100 billion a year, more than $1 trillion every decade. And I said, wow, if we could build a technology product, if we could build a platform that just by helping people be the people they want to be, unlocked an extra $1 trillion for charity,
wow,
sign me up. And so that actually was both the disappointment and the opportunity that became the Daffy product.
Are you involved? Is the app involved with also the recommending charities for the participants, or that's left purely to the people? You know, I don't. If you I have to look at it. You set an array of charities out there that they have to be registered. How does it work in terms of?
There's a lot of ways to approach that recommendation problem. And not surprisingly, it's very important to people. People want ideas of how to give. They're not confident that they know all the organizations or the quality of those organizations. So we've invested a lot. Not surprisingly, we have some of the best engineers and data science folks, in the industry. It's, we go through a lot of the public data, third parties, the organizations themselves, and we try to give every charity, every organization on our platform. We try to give our members the information about them to make those decisions. And actually, we also, every member of Daffy, when they make a donation, has the opportunity to leave a comment to talk about why do they give. And it's very different. It's like, it's like a little bit like reviews, et cetera. There's a big difference between hearing what people think of a restaurant versus people who've actually eaten at that restaurant. And so having donors share with each other why they give to the organizations they give to is phenomenal. But the truth is, most of our focus has not been on that problem. There's a lot of wonderful sites and organizations that focus on that problem. We've basically focused on the other side of that problem, which is making sure people have the money to give, right? If you think about it, giving is two very hard problems. How much can I afford to give?
Right.
And who do I give the money to? And there's a lot of platforms and sites focused on that second problem, but we discovered not many focused on that first. And so our real core focus on Daffy was, like I said, is just making sure that people put money aside for charity so that when they want to give to an organization, they have that money. And we put it on an app so you have it in your pocket. Now, of course, underlying it is this donor advised fund, which for the most part has been a product for the wealthy, but has phenomenal tax advantages and turns out to be an amazing way to save money for charity. And you can put not just cash into it, you can put stock in it, you can put ETFs, mutual funds, crypto, and there's huge advantages to that. And we actually have members who have put aside millions of dollars, tens of millions for charity already.
Because the benefit is that you don't have to pay any tax on the growth. of the investment if it's going to charity?
Well, there's two big benefits to the donor advised fund. And for people who have a lot of money and assets, it makes a lot of sense because there are two ways you save on taxes. The first way is obvious, right? When you put money aside for charity, when you give money to charity, you get this charitable deduction, which is off income, which of course are the highest tax rates. And so just giving money to charity is fantastic. And the donor advised fund makes it easier to do that on an ongoing basis because it separates the problem of who you're going to give the money to from putting the money aside and getting that deduction. So if you want to put aside $100, $500, $1,000, whatever you want to put aside every month, you can do that and get that deduction. But if you donate stock or you contribute stock or crypto or any asset really, mutual fund, the second tax benefit is you never pay the capital gains on that investment, right? So if you were fortunate enough to buy a Vanguard index fund 15 years ago, and now the market's up 3 times, you don't really have all that money because when you sell that mutual fund, you'll have to pay taxes on it. But if you donate that mutual fund, if you contribute that mutual fund, you'll never pay that capital gains and you get the full deduction for that contribution in the year you do it. So there's phenomenal advantages. But I will tell you, most of our members are not millionaires. They're not wealthy people. Most people who give to charity put aside a few $100s a year, and they give to a handful of charities every year in organizations they care about. And I'm actually very proud of the fact that most of our members, that's what they do with our product. As much as I am comforted by the idea that as people get wealthier, we've also built a platform where they put aside even more money for charity. I mean, that's our mission, right? Is to help people be more generous.
I'm curious. I don't know if this exists anywhere. Is there like a methodology to donate like alternative asset classes like art or baseball cards, or is that something that people are doing in this space yet?
There are organizations that do this. There are a couple, not many, as you can imagine. That's not the biggest source of either funds or donations, etc. But yes, there are organizations. There's one group called Charitable Solutions that focuses just on complex assets, parts of small businesses. People contribute real estate, all these different things. But for most people, actually, like I said, it just comes down to understanding the idea that there is an account where you can put aside money for charity. In the last 40 years, everyone's learned for retirement, there's a 401k, there's an IRA. In the last 20 years, people are learning that, hey, for college, there's a 529 plan.
Right.
Donor advised funds have been around for decades, maybe even 80 years. But fundamentally, most people still haven't heard of it. So a lot of the Daffy experience is just realizing that, wow, not only is there an account for putting aside money for charity, but actually it makes giving better, because when you put money aside for charity, it takes that whole anxiety about how much you can afford to give away and lets you focus on what you want to do, which is actually support causes and organizations you believe in.
And the flip side, like say from putting my fundraiser hat on, is that if people have a donor advised fund, then that money has already been set aside to be distributed. So they have money to give away. They have to decide where they want to give it, but it's there. They have to give it away at some point. That's accurate, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. The money can't be taken out and used for any other purpose.
Right.
And you're very correct. One of the reasons donor advised funds are a very hot topic with most nonprofit organizations is that more and more people are using them. There is more money there, and that money is dedicated for charity. I would say the other advantage for nonprofits, of course, is actually a lot of nonprofit organizations aren't actually looking for just one big donation, right? Most nonprofits have an ongoing responsibilities. They're looking for recurring donations. They're looking for ongoing support.
Correct.
And it turns out that donor advised funds are perfect for that. The money is put aside. And so setting up recurring donations, setting up ongoing support, having all your giving in one place is not just a great thing from your tax perspective. It turns out it's a wonderful thing to make sure that you are consistently supporting the organizations that you support and hopefully growing that support over time. And these are all very hot topics in fundraising organizations. And, donor advised funds turn out, I think, if we do them properly with platforms like Daffy, we can make it much easier and much more consistent for people to support these organizations and these organizations to receive that ongoing support.
Fascinating. Very, very interesting and very, very important. Shift back a little bit more to the personal. Tell us something about yourself that most people wouldn't know or wouldn't guess. Hobby you have, or just something that I wouldn't read, reading about you online, something interesting of that nature.
Oh,
Doesn't have to be too
well,
personal, but I'm saying,
yeah,
something
you're asking
interesting.
hard questions.
Something out,
I'm not
something
sure
out of
how
the box.
interesting I am, as it turns out. But no. Listen, actually, I actually fairly public about it. So I don't know if I can meet your first requirement because as one of the early folks in social media, etc., I probably overshare things about my life. But there's probably thousands of people who follow me on Twitter, not for technology or finance, but just because I'm an avid gardener and I've been doing it for 20 years. And there's a lot of people, not just in Silicon Valley, but around the country and around the world, who just love that. They love growing things. They love planting things. I mean, I'll tell you, it's something I did personally in the early days. And classic engineer, I'm very tolerant of the fact that I'm not going to get it right the first time, but I keep iterating and keep learning and growing every year. And so at this point, it's a fairly abundant garden because that's what I go for. But I'll tell you, as a parent and a father, love it. This world has too many things pushing people towards instant gratification. Gardening is the perfect example of delayed gratification, right? You plant, you prepare, and right away, not a lot happens. You go to that garden the next day, it's not that different than today. But in a few weeks, things change. And I love the effect when, the children get to reap the harvest of that work that they did just a few months ago, just long enough to learn that lesson, but not so long that they lose attention and then go off elsewhere. But I'm also, I'm very active in fitness. I go to the gym, try to stay in shape. I'm known in some circles. I'm the guy who built the LinkedIn Lego. And sometimes I overshare.
What's that? What is the LinkedIn Lego?
Oh, so it was kind of a gift. It's something I built at LinkedIn towards the end of my tenure there. But I built a giant Lego sculpture, over 12,000 pieces of the LinkedIn brand. And it was a giant time capsule. Actually, everyone at the company before the IPO actually put in their prediction about where LinkedIn would be in 10 years. Actually, the CEO just opened it for the whole company. We built it in 2011. So they opened it in 2021. But I do love Legos. I think, like I said, connecting the dots backwards, at some level, I've always been an engineer. I love building things. I love cutting things. In fact, I think the reason I work so much with my hands at home and in the yard and things like Legos is because I ended up in software. Everything I build is virtual. And there's I think an innate desire to work with your hands.
Fascinating. If I asked you, Adam, where do you see yourself 5-10 years down the road? What would you say?
Oh, in some ways, I think what I'm hoping he'll be doing is steering this amazing platform. I hope to see millions of people putting aside money for causes and organizations that they care about, and actually inspiring each other, learning from each other to give. The platform has been wonderful to see that, but I hope that's what I'm doing. And part of it, of course, as a father, a lot of my hopes and dreams are tied up into what will happen with my children, and the stresses and strains and rewards of them growing up and living their lives. But in some ways, I hope to be doing the same. I teach at Stanford. I love teaching. I hope I'm still investing and advising kind of the next generation of founders. And I hope that I'm still building.
You're teaching Stanford. You teach Stanford undergrad, or you teach in graduate school? Where do you teach in Stanford?
So I actually teach in the computer science department, but not a computer science class. I teach personal finance for engineers. It's actually the 7th year I've been teaching it.
Really?
And it's actually open to both undergraduate and graduate students. It's the class that I wish existed when I was there. It turns out Stanford is filled with a lot of brilliant students, a lot of people, many of which are immigrants or are the first in their family to go to college. And they feel like they don't know because it's not taught. It's not taught in middle schools. It's not taught in high schools.
What's unique about personal finance, particularly for engineers, as opposed to anybody else?
Well, I mean, the personal finance for engineers, the engineers part really doesn't have a lot of impact on the advice, except for a couple things that are tailored. One is that engineering turns out to be a fairly good career. And so actually, it turns out that young people who go off into that career have to make money decisions often earlier than other people.
Got it.
And so we talk a little bit about compensation and other things. I also can assume that the people in the class are not afraid of math, which helps sometimes. But actually, it's really about personal finance. And then some of it is just branding. In Silicon Valley, everyone assumes that if it's for the engineers, then it must be great. It must be better. And so in some ways, it's my effort, because my long-term goal with the class and with material, I make it publicly available on a website, is I really think that the college is too late. I really think that this should be taught in high schools and middle schools. And so I try to make the material openly available, and hopefully a little bit of that brand cachet of having a course. You know, if you know that this is a class that's good enough for Stanford engineers to take, then I'm hoping that more people will think it's good enough for them to look at and listen to. Because, like I said, it's not about IQ. It's not about intelligence. It's not about the quality of you as an individual. For some reason in this country, we're reticent to teach our children about money, about finance, about how economics works. And I think that's a problem at multiple levels, but I think it's a disservice to them. You go out in the world pretending that the world somehow exists without, money flowing through, without these personal finance decisions. I tell all the students in my class, rarely are personal finance decisions actually about money. They're really about a much harder question, because they're questions about your life and what kind of life you want to live. Right. People save money not to get more money. Very often it's to provide for themselves, their family, their children, it's money for their goals, right? Whether it's retirement or buying a house or starting a business, that's the motivation, And so I try to teach through that lens. But like I said, a lot of the basics we cover are as simple as like how to actually make a budget, how to actually understand how much you're worth, how are you doing, how to invest money, how to think about the long term. So I love these topics. I've always loved these topics. And it's a real delight for me to be able to teach them at a place like Stanford.
Fascinating. I love that. It's great. This final question, because I don't want to take too much more time. I always like to explore with my guests not only the victories and the successes, and thankfully it sounds like you've had many, and I hope you'll continue to have, but the other side in terms of great challenges, or because we often become great through overcoming obstacles, and through our failures are often what catapult us forward to greater success. I would love to hear maybe one or two failure stories, or things that didn't go as planned, and maybe what you learned from them.
Oh, there's a lot of things that didn't go as planned. And there's certainly, in technology, you have to have a thick skin for failure, because there's a lot of them. Although I tend to not look at that way. I tend to look at the fact that there's risk in everything. Not everything is going to turn out. What do they say? The only bad experiment is one that you don't learn from. And so I tend to approach it that way. So I could give some trivial examples, but I will say that from a career standpoint, a lot of ups and downs. There were times I thought I wanted to be a venture capitalist. There were times that I thought wanted to be a great engineer, and so it was a little bit of a path learning along the way. But I think that, for me, I think setbacks, etc. We're in the fourth tech downturn. A lot of people don't remember, but, when I graduated in the 1990s, when I went to school, right, Hewlett Packard was doing layoffs. Engineering did not look like a safe career. It was unclear in that recession that, technology was the place to be. Like I said, I joined Apple when it looked like it was going bankrupt. I graduated business school into the downturn. And so, when I think about different disappointments, et cetera, I think that, when I leave companies, it's like you have regrets, things you could have done more of. But it's really hard to pull that thread of your life. You get asked this question sometimes, what would you change about your life? And maybe it's because I've read too much science fiction, watched a few too many Marvel movies, that sort of thing. But philosophically, would you really pull a thread of your life? Right? There's so many important things in your life. Even if there are a huge number of things that you don't like about your life, you're going to put at risk one of the things you do love.
Right.
How do I know? My children, my job, what I'm doing, all these things. And so, but I will tell you from a career standpoint, you talked about careers earlier. I remember I worked for a venture capital firm when I left business school called Atlas Venture. Actually is split up and actually has formed a wonderful nucleus. They're actually investing in great seed companies, but the bubble bursting was hard. They decided to shut down their Silicon Valley office. And here I am at the end of 2002, newly married, out of work. And by the way, it wasn't like the boom. It didn't feel like the next job was just there.
Right.
And it was very friendly. The firm was supportive, et cetera. But I remember sitting there thinking, what am I going to do next? right?
Right.
And a little bit of that pressure. You're young, you're ambitious, but you also, I'm married, thinking about starting a family, et cetera. Actually, we had our first just a couple of years later. But that journey led me to thinking about, well, what did I learn in venture capital? What are the companies that are most successful? And actually, the framework I came up there actually led me to eBay, eventually led me to LinkedIn and a number of other Wealthfront, a number of other successful companies. And so did it feel good at the time? No, that did not feel good. It never feels good to be laid off.
Right.
But at the same time, I can't imagine my career without it at this point.
Right. Okay, Adam, I want to thank you so much for making the time to share with us your insights, your experiences. Really, really very educational, inspirational. I wish you continued success with Daffy and with all your great work. And it was really great getting to know you a bit. Thank you so much.
I don't know. Thank you, Debbie, for having me.
Sure.